Alright, it's time to rate every episode of Total Drama Island Season 2/Part 2, as Season 1 and Season 2 are actually all part of one big 26 episode season. For this video, I'll be referring to the first 13 episodes as Season 1 and the last 13 episodes as Season 2 because it makes more sense. The rating system will be the same as last time in the rating every episode of Total Drama video. It's going to be a letter grade system. Good episodes get A's, bad episodes get F's, and then there's everything in between. Alright, it's time to get in here. Episode 1, The Pink Painter Strikes Again. This episode starts off with a recap of the last chaotic season, and it brought back some good memories. Like I said about that season in the past, it surprised me and I didn't expect it to be as good as it ended up being. But getting back to the recap, Chris said that Priya won last season, and throughout this episode and the season, they've made it clear that Priya won and Bowie lost, and there's no room for an alternate ending where Bowie wins. This was interesting because in most seasons, they structure it to where they never really say that a finalist won or was a runner-up, so both endings can be canon. I talked about Bowie as if he was a winner because I thought that there was going to be an alternate ending out there, but if that's not the case and Priya's the only winner, then that's fine. So yeah, the contestants got dropped out of a helicopter, and once they got on the island, they started getting their intros and talking about being back on the island and reconnecting with others, which was fun. The best part was when Emma shut down Chase. I really just don't like that guy at all. Season 1 was a great, spectacular season, but at points, it was weighed down by Chase, so it's good that they're not trying to make Chima happen, and maybe Emma can have some plot line or something for herself outside of Chase in this season. Next, the two finalists got to pick their teams. Priya got Millie, Emma, Caleb, Damien, Axel, Z, and Nichelle, and they're going to be Team Ratface. While Bowie got Raj, Wayne, Julia, Chase, MK, Scary Girl, and Ripper, and they're going to be Team Skunk Butt. On paper, Priya's team is very uninteresting because she has to work with some early exits like Caleb and Nichelle. But there's a lot of intrigue on Bowie's team, and most of it stems from Julia. Like, Bowie played a big role in Julia's elimination last season, so I want to see that rivalry continue and see how it plays out this time around. Also, Julia and MK had a little incident last season, but instead of continuing their beef, they actually teamed up this time around out of respect for what they showed in the previous season. This alliance that got formed right here would go on to be such a focal point of this season. After they picked teams, they had to compete in this challenge where they had to get to a finish line while avoiding Granny Hatchet throwing paint balloons at them. This was such a fun challenge, with folks getting eliminated in funny ways, like when Z's soda gave him away. In the end, Team Rat won, sending Team Skunk to the first campfire ceremony where, I've got to say, at the ceremonies, Chef still gives these little rundowns of the day and explains reasons why someone can be voted out for the main folks on the chopping block. That stuff just came out of nowhere in season 1, and now it looks like it's going to be a staple, which is nice. Sometimes it's funny, especially when Chef is so smug about it. Anyways, they voted out Scary Girl, Normal Girl, whatever. They voted her out here. There was this plotline where she changed her look and tried to be normal, but once she revealed that she studied everyone to learn this, they decided that they're not having none of that nonsense and got her out immediately. I was spoiled on this before the season released, as I sort of alluded to in my top 10 favorite Total Drama characters video. I was hoping for a big bounce back season for Lauren, so I'm really disappointed that now she's gone out really early in back-to-back seasons and her new Normal Girl plotline never really got a chance to get off the ground. But that's not going to drag this episode down, no way. The Julia and MK alliance got set up in this episode, and the challenge was fun. It's a solid A tier episode. Episode 2, Taking It to the Rim Reaper. The challenge for this episode was this slide basketball where they would slide down 3 different slides that were 3 different lengths to try and score a basket. Unlike last episode where everyone got a decent amount of screen time, this episode was really only focused on 3 things. One of them was the challenge itself, to which that's fine. It was an entertaining challenge at points, although as it went on, it got a bit repetitive. Chase also got a lot of focus because Emma tricked him into trying to make a video about sliding down the slide because he always gets stuck on making the intro. So that happened, and Emma taunting him was fun. First time she's ever made me laugh. And lastly, Ripper had a crush on Axel, and that got brought up a decent amount of times. Interesting because last season, they were really going at it in that Pirates of the Cabbagean episode. The best moment in this episode was when Ripper was about to slide down and he wanted Julia to get Axel to notice him, but not to be too obvious, but Julia just blurted out, "Yo Axel, this nude butterball has a crush on you and wants you to watch him slide." In the end, Team Skunk lost, and to my delight, my favorites were safe in Bowie, Julia, and MK, and on the chopping block were Chase and Ripper. Perfect because I don't even like them, especially Chase. But in the end, it was obvious that Chase was leaving because Ripper and Axel just have to be explored more, so that's understandable. This episode is going to get a B. All right challenge, and there were some fun moments, but I didn't like that they gave Ripper and Chase so much screen time in comparison to the others when there were more interesting plots in the background, like Julia and MK's plan with the employee uniform. Also, Caleb was really working Priya and actually playing the game this time around, so that would have been interesting to see, and it's why this episode can't get rated any higher. Episode 3, You Poor Saps. In this episode, for the challenge, they had to race to the other side of the island while having this sticky sap on them, which would make the challenge harder. Kind of reminds me of the Jurassic Fart episode from last season where that was also a race to the other side of the island. There were 2 storylines that were being pushed to the forefront in this episode. One of them was that in the last episode, there were actually 4 slides. The 4th one was dangerous, but it granted 4 points. So Millie pushed Damien down there because they needed 4 points and she didn't want to split the slides up 3-1 because she's lazy. Then after this, everyone was disgusted with her move, especially Damien, which is understandable. In season 1 and season 2, Damien is like the Charlie Brown of this cast, Milo Murphy's Law, like whatever can go wrong will go wrong for him. So yeah, Millie spent most of this episode focusing on that, once being unapologetic because they won the challenge. Then near the end, when she realized that she was definitely in the wrong, she tried to apologize to Damien. But the plot that took over was MK and Julia. So what happened was the employee uniform finally came into play as MK used it to sneak into a production meeting and she learned where the sap remover was. So that gave their team a real advantage and MK and Julia started going around the island and sabotaging folks and they still won. Going back to Millie, in the end, she was voted off as there was no real setup for anyone else to go, which was a perfect outcome. She's terrible, but she's not going to bring this episode down. In the end, the Julia and MK alliance finally got off the ground for real when they dominated this challenge and they were fun to watch. They stole the show and they're a big reason why this episode is going to get an A+. Fun challenge, fun villainy. Episode 4. Choosing for a Bruising. For the challenge, they had to answer these would you rather questions while walking across a bridge, and if they got a question wrong, they fell. There were some smaller storylines like in the last episode. Wayne and Raj were so upset that their team cheated, so that was being talked about. Also, Caleb was slowly working on his alliance with Priya, and the Ripper and Axel love story, whatever, finally materialized as they got together at the end of this episode, to which they weren't really my favorites. I don't really care about the couple, but it doesn't take away from the show. But the best plots revolved around Julia and MK, then Emma. Julia and MK cheated once again when MK snuck off to get the cheat codes for the challenge and they started dominating. Then the other good plot was when Emma kept on blurting out the wrong answers and Priya tried to take advantage of this by telling Caleb to just go with the opposite of what Emma said. When Z exposed that so casually, Emma got so mad. It was also funny how Emma had a chance to clinch the win, but she got the last question about Chase wrong, which lost the challenge for Team Rat. In the end, Emma was voted out here, to which I didn't really care about her in the last season, but in this season, she was good fun in her short run as a nice punching bag, and I really wish that she would have been like this more often. Being a punching bag probably isn't good for building a character, especially one like Emma, one that probably should have had a big solo arc this season without Chase. Wasted potential for sure, but as a comedic character this season, Emma works in her limited time. In the end, this episode is going to get an A-. The challenge was a bit repetitive, just answering questions and walking across a bridge. It's not that riveting, but MK, Julia, and Emma carry what could have been a B-tier episode to an A-. Episode 5, Ice to Beat You. For the challenge, they had to go through this iceberg and collect keys to unlock a safe, grab a coin, and bring it back to Chris. This episode was all about secrets. The one that got kept was Z, not telling Caleb that Priya likes him, which was surprising that Priya told Z after his abysmal performance in the last episode and his track record overall. But the secret that didn't get kept was Bowie's involvement in the cheating. Raj really cared about Bowie playing a clean game, so Julia used this as leverage to have a bunch of control over Bowie. Kind of reminds me of Scott using Mike's secret as leverage in Revenge of the Island. Some fun moments in this episode were when Julia and Nichelle got into a little argument about Hollywood movies and what role they'd be qualified for, to which Nichelle said that Julia isn't a movie star, she's more of a small town dinner theater type of person. I laughed out loud when Nichelle said that. Also, another funny moment was when Z took a Waz on the ice that his team was supposed to be jumping on and melted it. Also in the challenge, another good moment was this big chaotic snowball fight with Bowie, Raj, and Wayne going up against Julia, MK, and Ripper, trying to stand up to the cheating. Team Skunk is definitely providing more entertainment than Team Rat so far. And for the elimination, that Julia and Nichelle argument came into play when Julia got Nichelle to quit because she made a fake movie contract for her. I was relieved when I saw this because I really thought that I was spoiled when one day I saw this Twitter X post in my feed saying something along the lines of, the category is athletic women that, and I didn't read the last part, but I saw Nichelle along with Zoe and Sky, total drama winners, and my gut just sank like, wow, I got spoiled and I wasn't even looking for spoilers. But whatever that was, ended up being not what I thought it was or a prediction or whatever. All that matters is that Nichelle got eliminated and tanked, I've got to say. All that training just to be a forgettable pre-merge exit again. It was an unfortunate situation to have to root against Nichelle and what I thought was a spoiler, but it was good that ever since Nichelle got eliminated, I wasn't going into every episode with the assumption that she's immune, and now that opens up the door for the good characters. Bowie can't make it because he's already made a final, but Julia and MK are still in the running, and Caleb's gameplay has been really good this season. Even though he's supposed to be a similar archetype to Justin and Alejandro, it's nice that success isn't coming to Caleb immediately and he has to build up his alliance with Priya through multiple episodes, unlike some alliances that Justin and Alejandro made. But yeah, for this episode, it's definitely going to get an A+. So far, it's the funniest episode of the Revival series. Episode 6, Can You Believe It? It's merge time. Very early actually, it's only the 6th episode, but yeah, that's something to look forward to. In this episode, MK got exposed for her cheating, and it was hilarious that for a punishment, In the challenge, she had to go up against a bear. Speaking of the challenge, they had to partner up and take these canoes to the lake and compete in this jousting tournament. The challenge was good fun. There were some interesting pairings like Raj versus Bowie and Ripper versus Axel, where Bowie and Axel both had to forego their love for their partner to advance in the tournament. Damien won immunity, and it was nice to finally see him get something to go his way. Like, he had to go through a gauntlet of Z, Julia, and Bowie to get his win. David versus Goliath settings. But the standout storyline for this episode was Priya and Caleb. For a few episodes, they had been talking here and there, but in this episode, they actually got to spend an extended amount of time together in the challenge and while looking for the immunity idol. And through this, they got to flirt and learn about each other on a deeper level, which got Caleb to actually like Priya for real and see her as more than just a number. This episode got me to realize that they could be a fun couple and have more substance to them than the comic relief Ripper and Axel pairing. For the vote, Bowie got voted out over MK after Julia framed the cheating on him, which was unfortunate because those were my three: Bowie, MK, and Julia, but like I said, Bowie already made a final, so it was a good call to let MK stay over him. In the end, this episode is going to get an A. The only thing that could have got it an A+ was more MK and Julia content, as they were separated for most of this episode and only really reconnected at the tail end. But it's not a huge deal because the challenge and prelude were solid enough. It's all this episode needs to get an A. Episode 7, Fun Fight at the OK Corral. For the challenge, they got divided into teams and they were tasked with baking a Chris McLean cake. Elephant in the room, Owen, Big O, came back for the challenge to be a disadvantage in the challenge and a judge. Now this doesn't answer like what happened to the All-Stars, as at the end of that season, most of them floated away in bubbles that Owen was blowing. And he was in Redonkulous, so yeah, he's totally fine. Not sure about the others. But that aside, it was nice to see an old contestant in this revival that feels a bit disconnected from the original run, so it's nice to see that the revival is getting on top of that and connecting the worlds in continuity more. Owen being here kind of reminds me of Revenge of the Island, when they were bringing back Gen 1 contestants almost every episode to be part of a challenge in some way. Nice to see Owen here, and hopefully this opens up the door for more guest appearances or flat out a mega season with all of the players from the camp seasons just battling it out, or a second All-Star season, something like that. But yeah, getting back to the challenge, it was an entertaining challenge all around in every way. There was a fun section in the beginning when everyone got to the battle barge and started fighting over supplies, just so much chaos. Then Julia got paired up with the Hockey Bros, and since they're so incompetent, she had to carry like her name was 2018 LeBron James. I couldn't stop laughing at the scene where the Hockey Bros were playing baseball with the eggs and Julia let them have it. Speaking of carry jobs, MK also had to carry her team because Axel and Ripper were too busy eating each other's faces and romancing it up. The part that was the funniest was when Axel was painting a portrait of a shirtless Ripper. Add in all of the sabotage like Owen trying to eat the cakes and the kitchen quake, then this was a fun challenge, especially at the end where the Damien, Z, Priya, and Caleb team lost because they used Ripper's armpit yeast in their cake, handing the dub over to Julia and the Hockey Bros. For the vote, they split up the showmance, getting Axel out of there, which got Ripper to run after her, so he's out of there as well, to which the showmance was funny in this episode, but for the season, I didn't really care about them that much. They didn't really add much or take anything away from this season. I've been talking about Julia and MK a lot, and Priya and Caleb are starting to become something nice, so there were more interesting dynamics and pairings to focus on. Also, Damien found the idol in this episode and is cementing himself as a big player, so there were just other players that were more relevant. In the end, this chaotic episode is going to get an A+. No way it was going to get anything lower. The challenge was so fun. Episode 8, Allin' and Ballin'. For the challenge, it was this pinball challenge where they had to carry these big admission coins up a mountain to get in. Then when they got in, they had to rack up points. The challenge design was amazing because they had a scary girl robot and an Izzy head right next to each other. Also, they had a dunk knee section, so that was nice to see. There were some fun moments in here, like Wayne and Raj causing a rock fall, and when MK's coin launched in the air, she said, "How will it end? Heads or tails?" and it landed on her head. But this episode was all about the secret that Z was trying to keep in, even though it was outdated and Caleb actually got feelings for Priya legitimately. Julia spent most of this episode trying to pry the secret out of Z, and he kept on putting stuff in his mouth to make sure that never happened. Like for that beginning section, it was hilarious when he was just walking around with his pants in his mouth. But after a long day of holding in the secret, he finally told it right after Caleb and Priya kissed, which made Caleb such a pariah. Too bad Z couldn't keep his mouth shut, as he also made himself a pariah by blurting out everyone's secrets. The other secrets were whatever, but I laughed out loud when he said that MK sleeps with a stuffed unicorn named Theodore. In the end, Z got voted out over Caleb, which was questionable as Caleb's definitely a bigger threat than Z, and Caleb staying here can only be summed up to having plot armor. Z's an open book, and he's such a non-threat in challenges and dictating the social game because he just goes with the flow. While Caleb just got exposed, and for all they know, he's a manipulator just like his predecessors in Justin and Alejandro, players that have been decently successful, especially Alejandro. The new Total Drama seasons have been a lot more strategy focused, and every elimination makes sense and gets a solid explanation, but that can't be said for this elimination. They really just voted Z out because they got their feelings hurt. And I should have knew that Caleb wasn't leaving because he and Damien have aura running through their veins in this season, just like Bowie in season 1. Gotta see what happens to Damien's idol. Gotta see the aftermath of the pre-lip situation, so they're not going anywhere. But yeah, it's not a huge, atrocious deal because although it was a forced elimination that doesn't make any sense, this was the second time that Z had a hilarious elimination. This is definitely going to get an A. It's just filled with a lot of fun moments, and now, going forward, the Caleb and Priya romance plot can finally face some adversity instead of being so one-sided. Episode 9, the breakup episode. For the challenge, they had to bring back the biggest thing they could find, then fit it through this mail slot in a door, which meant that they had to break down the stuff so it would fit. This stuff led to a lot of fun chaos, with Wayne destroying the outhouse and MK destroying Chef's car. Speaking of Chef's car, how is he even getting that thing on a remote island? Aside from the challenge chaos, there were two main things that were being pushed in this episode. One of them was the pre-lip breakup, where Caleb had to play as this big outcast because of his actions, and for most of this episode, Priya was mad at Caleb, and Caleb was trying to make it up to her. This goes back to the Z vote, like everyone here wants Caleb out so badly when they could have got him out last episode instead of wasting their votes on Z because they got their feelings hurt. Just seeing how everyone was acting in this episode calls that vote into question even more. It doesn't make any sense. Anyways, just talking about Prelim now, their relationship was solid and I wanted to see all sides of them, see everything they had to offer with this breakup and what would come of that and how they'll overcome it. But nothing interesting came from this episode. Instead of having a heart-to-heart conversation, it was just Priya being mad, which is understandable, but that's it. She just whines all episode and she's really annoying. Prelip tanked in this episode, just not that interesting, but a pairing that didn't tank in this episode, at least entertainment-wise, was MK and Julia. Had to say entertainment-wise because they literally tanked in this episode, like it was the fall of the MK and Julia alliance. They couldn't manipulate Priya and use her emotions for their benefit. They couldn't get Caleb, a lone wolf pariah, into their alliance, and because Caleb won immunity, MK and Julia ended up having to turn on each other, resulting in MK's elimination. It's unfortunate because they were dominating this season. They carried, but all good things must come to an end, and this alliance went out on a good note when MK left, respecting the game and hugging Julia. For that, this episode is going to get a plus tacked on to what was going to be a B grade, making it a B+. Alright challenge, solid chaos, but they prioritized Prelude over the much better MK and Julia storyline in this episode, which wouldn't have been a big deal if Priya wasn't so annoying. So yeah, this episode is going to get a B+. Episode 10, Circling the Drain. For the challenge, they had to memorize the placements of campers on the board, and if they got the question right, they got a point, but if they got it wrong, then they get a specialized punishment based on the person that they picked. This episode right here was a Julia masterclass. Like, she had a hand in everything that was going on. At the challenge, she and Damien had a nice little back and forth trying to mess with each other's answers. Julia got Damien crushed by a scary girl skull, his favorite, and Damien got Julia blown into the air by MK's hair dryers. Also, another thing that Julia was involved in was trying to keep Prelude separated by giving them bad advice, but once they found out that they were getting played, it turned into a 2 versus 1 in the challenge, which Julia won. It was funny when Priya was crying about the rules because she selected the right answer but on Julia's tablet after fighting her, and Chris was like, "Oh, you shouldn't have turned the memory game into a wrestling match." And the Julia Fest doesn't stop there, as she got to share immunity and she gave it to Caleb in exchange for him promising to vote her way for the rest of the season, which made Priya so mad. And it doesn't stop there, as later it was revealed that Julia stole Damien's idol, causing him to be vulnerable for this elimination and eventually getting eliminated. The folks in that writer's room love Julia. Like, this episode is all about her. I would have a problem if it were someone like Ripper that got this amount of propping up, but Julia is an amazing character, so it's not a problem at all. In the end, this episode is going to get a B- because of this tough balancing act. On one hand, this episode made Julia a more relevant character than a Prelude showmance that's starting to overstay their welcome, so that's perfect. But there were problems in this episode, like the challenge itself not being too interesting and the character interactions really having to carry that portion. Also, Julia versus Damien was fun, and I wish that could have continued rather than what's going to be Julia versus the showmance, mainly Priya. This was a big season for Damien, and I wanted him to go further or at least outlast Priya. In episode 9, MK's elimination was bearable because although in a way the showmance was prioritized over her as Caleb won immunity, at least that was a nice place to wrap up MK and Julia's story before it potentially got stale, like how Prelude is becoming. But Damien's story felt unfinished, like he had more to give to this season. Now with Damien taken out, that's now 2 solid characters in Z and Damien that were taken out just to advance the showmance, and they were totally forced, and all 100% because of Prelude to help them make it another round. Priya should have been gone in this episode. Like, Caleb finally confessed his love for her and they made up. That should have been the end of their story for this season. But they tacked on this Caleb working with Julia plotline for more conflict between Prelude, and they're gonna drag out something that should have concluded in this episode. Julia's chaos is always fun to watch, but Prelude's plot armor wasn't fun to watch, so it has to fall somewhere in the middle with a B- grade. Episode 11, Working K9 to 5. For the challenge, they had to avoid these dogs, and if they got caught and brought back to the circle 3 times, then they lost. MacArthur made a guest appearance as the leader of the K9 unit. This still doesn't affect anything that I had to say about the Redonkulous race and where it ranks as a season, but she's one of the better characters on that season, and it's nice to see her again. After having such a standout episode in the previous episode, it made sense that they cut back on Julia in this episode, although she is in the most powerful position in the middle of two pairs that need her vote. She was fine in this episode, like she won her immunity and facilitated the vote, but yeah, this episode was more so about the pairs. The one that the show really wanted to focus on was Prelude and where their relationship is currently, now that Caleb has this agreement with Julia that got Priya to doubt Caleb even more. Then there's just Wayne and Raj being this comedic pair that they've shown flashes of, but those were only flashes. Now that they're in the final 5, they have a bunch of time to mess around with without having to share screen time with like a Bowie or Axel and Ripper. The hockey bros are always saying some nonsense, especially Wayne. The funniest part was when Raj dressed this dummy up in his clothing and the dog shredded it, and then Wayne was just there grieving, actually thinking that was Raj. I thought that Priya was going home because she already won and she's getting dangerously close to making another final, but unfortunately, it ended up being Raj after he and Wayne just had their best episode, which is unfortunate. This episode is going to get a B+. It's a fine episode that had some highs like MacArthur showing up, and Wayne and Raj were fun all throughout this episode. But Prelude found a way to skate by again. Raj gets taken out here because of the combination of the Caleb and Julia deal dragging him around as an extra vote, and the hockey bros being so fixated on getting Caleb out rather than Priya, last season's winner, so there's no votes to get Priya out, and the most powerful player in the game is protecting Caleb for his vote. This situation was crafted just to ensure that Prelude would make it through this episode, and now regardless of what happens in the next episode, they're still gonna be in every episode because that's the penultimate episode, then everyone comes back for the final. It's just unfortunate because I'm not trying to hear any more showmance bickering when they should have been split up in the previous episode. I'm not even a Raj fan at all, but it's unfortunate that he gets taken out here and the showmance gets to last another episode when they have nothing left to offer. These past few episodes have been fine, they have some fun elements, but they have to take a prelude tax, which lowers their rating some, which is why this episode gets a B+ rather than an A-. Episode 12, Off the Hook. For the challenge, the final 4 had to try and send each other into these tanks of terror to face their fears, and the winner would be the only person left standing in the pit outside of the tanks. Really, this episode was Wayne off to the side, missing Raj, and while that was going on, Caleb had this big decision to make because he had an agreement with Julia, but Priya wanted him to go against Julia and vote her out. It's similar to the Grand Chef Otto episode from Revenge of the Island and the Ice to Beat You episode from this season where someone has this information, secret, deal, whatever, and they're using it as leverage, forcing the person that they're manipulating to go against their significant other. It's one of those type of episodes. There was a good amount of Julia and Priya fighting and Caleb struggling to make this decision on if he's going to throw the challenge to Julia or play for himself and Priya. In the end, he just hooked both of them and took immunity for himself while not having to pick between them. But for the vote, he finally ended up picking between them and backstabbing Julia and the deal that they made as she was voted out unanimously. But Julia's immunity idol saved her and she got the sole vote to send Priya packing. Thank you! Get off my screen! Priya had already won last season and they milked the Prelude storyline until there was nothing left, so that's a small win, but it doesn't matter a ton because she'll be back in the next episode. In the end, this episode is going to get a C+. There's usually a limit to how good episodes can be when they have a small cast, so there's that. But also, the challenge wasn't that interesting, and like I already said, Prelude overstayed their welcome. Even the Julia versus Priya of it all wasn't that interesting this time around because they've been going at it for a few episodes now. Try something new. Also, the elimination was very predictable because unless they wanted to break one of their main rules that's been established since the beginning of the series, then Priya had no chance to make it through this vote at all. It's an episode that had nothing horrendous or outstanding, which would have got it a C, but Priya's elimination was delicious, so yeah, it's gonna get a C+, but it's definitely below the penultimate episode from last season. Episode 13, Sore Losers. This time, it's a 3-person finale between Wayne, Caleb, and Julia, which was an interesting call. But if they had another challenge to decide a final 2, then it would be obvious that Julia is a guaranteed lock to make the final 2 because of the girl-boy format that they've implemented for every season except for Revenge of the Island. Good call to skip that and just get right into the final challenge. Give all 3 of them a chance to win. For the challenge, it's kind of like Total Drama Island 2007's final round where the finalists raced around the island and got assistance from their helpers. Everyone got the helpers that I was expecting, like Wayne got Raj, Bowie, that type of crowd. Caleb got Priya, Damien, and more, while Julia only got MK for support, which was just so fitting that they got to end this game together because they carried this season on their backs. Their interactions were a bright spot in this finale. Also, something else that was fun was the return of Scary Girl when, for some reason, MK gave Scary Girl a t-shirt launcher and she knocked Julia off course. Also, it was funny when Scary Girl couldn't contain herself when she heard about Caleb and Julia crashing through a tree, and she started singing about this in a confessional, kind of like her song last season about hiding bodies. Scary Girl Lauren being in this finale just reminded me of how fun of a character she can be, and it made me wish that, like, yeah, a character like her probably isn't going to win a season or anything, but she would have been nice to keep around for 8 or 9 episodes for some comedy. Anyways, for the most part, this race was between Julia and Caleb until Wayne just came out of nowhere and lucked his way into a win, making him one of the worst winners ever. Wayne is a good character, but he's not a good winner. He's not a guy that embodies this season. That's the first person that I think of when I hear Total Drama Island Season 2. Definitely not him. He's just a comic relief character that was fairly disconnected from the main stuff that was going on, and he lucked his way into a win over a decent amount of players that would have been more satisfying winners. The worst part about these 2 seasons is that this could have been okay. There was a way. On a normal season, they would have had a separate ending for Bowie, the real deserving winner, the real mastermind of Season 1. Then for Season 2, they would probably structure it differently to only have 2 endings, but the idea of Wayne, Caleb, and Julia all having an ending sounds nice. And even if they could only have 2 endings, it would have been fine because Julia and Caleb would have been better winners than Wayne, and at least one of them would have an ending to override Wayne's ending. But they ditched alternative endings, at least from what I'm seeing right now. Even though both of these seasons have not been released in the United States at the time of this recording, that seems to be the case, that there's no alternative endings. The only canon winner from this season is Wayne, which is unfortunate. Julia deserved it so much more, especially in this generation of Total Drama that focuses on strategy much more than the other seasons. She made solid alliances and deals with MK and Caleb that helped her get through the game. She stole Damien's idol and controlled and contributed to a lot of eliminations, even getting out Nichelle, a person that wasn't even on her team. Julia was also a good challenge beast, individually and team-wise, she showed her worth in the challenges, which got Bowie to look elsewhere when he initially only drafted her just to get rid of her immediately. Julia played the best game this season, and it's unfortunate that she couldn't win just because she's a villain when, even in the show that Total Drama is modeled after in Survivor, villains can win. She played the most dominant, cutthroat game for 2 seasons in a row, and all she's walking away with is a mullet after her friend, the Raptor, bit off a lot of her hair in this finale. I knew that she had no chance to win because she's a villain. And now, unless they want to get really crazy, she has no chance to win in potential future seasons and maybe get a Heather-style redemption arc because she already made a final, so that's a letdown. I spent a lot of time harping on Julia, but Caleb winning also would have made a lot of sense, as even though Prelib ran out of steam near the end, at least he had some good character growth in this season, and he was important to the narrative, and he was good at challenges, like he had some wins under his belt. Even players like Damien and MK would have been better winners than Wayne. The final was really good, one of the best in the series, but factoring in Wayne winning and getting the worst outcome, that's going to bring this episode down to a B- grade. This could have been an easy A+ if they had alternate endings, but that was not the case. Total Drama Island Season 2 Part 2 is a mixed bag. The season started off great actually. They experimented with stuff like Normal Girl and Ripper and Axel being a pair, and Millie taking a bit of a villainous turn for some time. Hit or miss stuff, but it didn't hurt this season because they had MK and Julia to fall back on. There was a lot of fun to be had with MK and Julia's cheating scandal and how it affected those around them, mainly Bowie and Raj. There wasn't a ton going on of real importance outside of MK and Julia, which could have been a negative that they're screen hogging, but it doesn't matter a ton because they're a fun pairing, and for the time that they were together, they carried. Prelib, on the other hand, wasn't good, especially in the later episodes. That's the pairing that I look at and then get upset about Emma's screen time and Nichelle's screen time and Normal Girl's screen time. Maybe if they took Prelib out, then Normal Girl's plot about trying to be normal could get fully realized. Maybe Nichelle gets to showcase her training more and goes on a challenge run and makes it deep into the merge. Maybe Emma gets some storyline to free her from just being one half of Chima. And there's more possibilities that couldn't happen because Prelib overstayed their welcome and they let a previous winner make it to the Final Four, just robbing players like Z, MK, Damien, and Raj of more satisfactory conclusions. When I decided to watch this, the first 8 episodes were streamable and I had to wait about a week and a half, 2 weeks for the remaining 5 episodes. I've got to say that it wasn't really worth that long of a wait. Like, the final 5 episodes were underwhelming for sure. There were some solid moments in those episodes, like MK and Julia's goodbye, and Julia versus Damien was a nice small moment. Also, MacArthur visiting the island was nice, and Wayne and Raj also went crazy in that episode. But they could never truly muster up a top tier episode because after MK left, Prelib became so overpowered, being able to stay over everyone, stay over better characters, and they were just front and center for the last stretch. Like, everything had to revolve around them. After the first 8 episodes, I was ready to mark this down as one of the elite seasons. But relating this back to my track running experience, the one thing that I always took with me is to always finish the race strong, regardless of what place you're in. Sometimes that can be the difference in placing, and when it comes to scouting, that last little stretch is the lasting image that someone has of you. Season 2 didn't finish strong. It wasn't awful, like I've seen worse out of Total Drama, especially in All Stars, but this season definitely finished out about average, which was a disappointment considering the pace and trajectory that this season was on. For where it ranks in the series, it's going to take some time to get some distance from it so all of the recency bias can go away and the season and everything that happened can settle in. But for the ranking at this moment, if it kept up the pace that it was going on in those first 8 episodes, then it was going to land somewhere in the top tier with Total Drama Island 2007 and Total Drama Island Season 1 Part 1 in the top tier. For now, Season 1 versus Season 2 is done. Definitely Season 1 over Season 2. Season 2 had higher highs, like Season 1 never had anything as nice as MK and Julia, but Season 1 didn't have anything as bad as Prelude, a relationship that actually started out nice, but they weren't that interesting in the later episodes and they hogged up screen time from better characters. Season 1 was just a more consistent, stable, all-around season than Season 2. But yeah, back to its ranking, taking everything into account, if I had to go back to my season rankings video and place it somewhere, then Season 2 is fighting for 3rd, 4th, or 5th place with World Tour and Revenge of the Island. But it goes no lower than that into that action and all-stars territory, as this season was still fun, even when it was falling off. Like, there were still moments. In the end, I was critical of the ending and harped on it a lot, but overall, this was definitely a good season of Total Drama. For a letter grade, a B+ for this season is good for now, and for a letter grade for the whole entire revival, the whole entire 26 episode season, it's gonna get an A. It was a big success. Hopefully, this wasn't the last of Total Drama with this cast, because they were solid and there's still some characters with untapped potential that could really benefit from having a 3rd season. But yeah, really enjoyed this season, really enjoyed rating all of these episodes, and yeah, that's about it.